Hi, it's Charlie Minato from halfwheel.com, and in front of me is the Prometheus Platinum Series 150 Humidor. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Prometheus, it is a multifaceted cigar company based out of Los Angeles. It sells cigars under names like God of Fire and Angelinos. It also sells cigar accessories. There are lighters, cutters, obviously humidors, and even ashtrays that Prometheus sells. And Prometheus also has a long-standing partnership with Arturo Fuente, known as Fuente Age Selection. And that is how cigars like Opus X Lost City or Don Carlos Edición de Aniversario, Opus 6, and the Opus 22 samplers, those are all sold through Fuente Age Selection. And it's through that partnership with Fuente that I have seen many, many versions of this humidor. And that's because Prometheus describes the Platinum Series as its flagship humidor, and it also seems to sort of be the standard humidor that Prometheus will use whenever it wants to make a special Fuente humidor. Prometheus basically has 4 levels of desktop humidors. It starts with the Milano series. Those humidors range between $449 to $649. Then you move up to the Octagon series, and those humidors retail between $500 and $750. And then you get to the Platinum series. This is the smaller and more affordable of the 2 Platinum series sizes. This is the Platinum Series 150, which has an MSRP of $1,995. There's also the Platinum Series 200, which is slightly larger, and that retails for $2,495. Above the Platinum Series are Prometheus's limited edition humidors, and those can range in shape, size, and price. Some of them are even sort of elaborate desktop cabinet humidors, so they're like this size, and they have doors that open up in front. Those humidors can retail for more than $5,000. A lot of times they do include cigars, so you have to factor that into the price points because the other 3 series do not come with cigars, and so that obviously explains some of the difference in price. So back to the Platinum Series, both the 150 and 200 are offered in the same 5 standard finishes. There is a dark Macassar ebony wood. There are 3 different tinted sycamores. This is the red. You can also get it in blue or yellow. And if you don't want a wood finish, Prometheus also sells both models with a carbon fiber finish. Now, regardless of which model you choose or which finish you choose, the price will be the same. The only thing that affects the price is the size. And the humidors look pretty much the same. Obviously, if you had one side by side, you'd be able to tell which one is the smaller, which one is the larger. But they both have this very similar shape, which is an imposing, wide, rectangular shape. This is the smaller of the 2 sizes, and it measures 20 inches wide on the exterior, so from here to here. It's 9¼ inches from here to here, and then 5¾ inches in height. And I'll go ahead and finish just the sort of 360 view of the humidor. So this is the back, and that is the hinge. So if you open up the lid, you can see kind of what it looks like that. And I guess some of you probably want this shot as well. And then I will turn the fingerprint magnet all the way around to the front. So I think that the other unique feature besides the width and that sort of imposing shape is the feet, or are the feet. So there are 4 square feet, brass-plated feet if I'm not mistaken, that are placed at each corner, and that elevates the humidor about 1/4 inch up off of whatever surface it's on. I don't think it provides any performance benefits. I suppose if you wanted to like store something very small underneath, you could. That's a pen. I don't know why you'd want to do that. But it does create a very unique appearance. You don't see elevated humidors at either the lower price points or the higher price points all that often. And the other thing that it does, which I think is helpful for this humidor in particular, is it creates a lot of contrast, because the shadow that's going to be created here at the bottom means that there's always this sort of black line that runs underneath the humidor, and that helps to make these colors pop all that more. Moving on to the interior, it measures 18¼ inches from here to here. It is 7½ inches from here to here, and it is 4 3/8 inches from the floor of the humidor to right here. That produces an interior volume of just around 599 cubic inches. Prometheus advertises this humidor as a 150 count humidor, hence Platinum Series 150. I would be very skeptical that you can fit 150 cigars inside this humidor and close the lid, perhaps 150 Petit Coronas. I certainly would be skeptical of the idea of 150 Robustos going in here and the lid shutting without any issue. I do think that you'll be able to fit more than 100 cigars in here without much issue and without having to play, extreme sort of storage organization games. But it is something to note. Now, Prometheus makes it very clear that this humidor is made in France. It says it in multiple places in the inside of the humidor. And it says that it's made in France. It does not say which company makes the humidor for Prometheus. It also doesn't really talk at all about the interior woods that are used, if you're curious about that. Now, in terms of what comes with the humidor, I'm going to start up top with the included hygrometer. This is a clear sign that you're getting an upgraded version of something compared to a $200 humidor or a $500 humidor. This is a digital hygrometer. It's a pretty advanced one at that. So it measures relative humidity and temperature, which is what most digital hygrometers will do. It also has a max-min function, which is what some digital hygrometers will do. But it also has an alarm feature, and that's because you can set the date and time, and then you can set an alarm, and it will audibly make noise to let you know that it's time to refill your humidifier. Prometheus also includes 2 batteries, which is a nice feature that it comes with. Now, this wooden piece right here is not supposed to be removable, but when our humidor showed up, it had already dislodged itself. It's glued, or supposed to be glued, to here. I don't know if it serves a performance benefit, but like I said, ours is dislodged. Good news is if you want to remove it, it's just glued in there and probably will come off without much issue. Now that leads to the humidifier. This is the Prometheus humidifier, and it's a good way to tell about whether or not you're looking at a 150 or a 200 series model. The 150 will come with just one of these, and the 200 will come with 2 of them. And I originally thought this was clay-based, and that was for a number of reasons. First is the weight. This thing weighs a lot more than what I would expect a Florist foam humidifier to weigh. Now it is a little bit thicker, and some of that's due to these sort of like grill areas up at the front, and also some of it's probably due to the fact that it's got a metal plate on the back, which is how it attaches magnetically. But it also is related to the type of foam. I don't think this is the same type of foam that you see in Florist foam. 1, it weighs a lot more. 2, it feels very differently. It feels very, very dense. And 3, it sort of breaks apart in a much different manner. Just sort of running your finger down it will lead to some of it coming off of it. And it's just a very different feeling type of foam. Now, Prometheus goes out of its way to sort of treat this differently than Florist foam, and that starts with how the humidor shows up. This shows up in a box, like the hygrometer does, and it's in plastic. And that's because this is already pre-filled and pre-treated with Prometheus's propylene glycol solution. Now, Prometheus has very, very detailed instructions about any number of things, ranging from how to set the date and time on the hygrometer, which I found very useful, to instructions about the humidifier, which I also found useful, to instructions about how to remove interior stains, which involves using sandpaper, and tells you, like, should you go against or with the grain, for example. So kudos to Prometheus for the very, very detailed instructions. Many of those can be found on its website as well. And when it comes to the humidifier, it gave 2 different pieces of advice, which were somewhat in contradiction in my case. One of them is that it says that this thing should weigh about a ½ pound when properly filled. But when it showed up, it weighed well over a ½ pound, more than a ½ pound. And so I didn't go through the sort of initial filling instructions. And the way that works, Prometheus basically says, take a large container, put about 2 inches of distilled water in, and just put this inside of the container, let it absorb the water. After 5 minutes, take it out, dry it off, and then you should be good to go. Prometheus says once a year you should fill this up with its propylene glycol solution, but otherwise, in terms of its monthly fillings, just use distilled water. And it does say that after about 2 years of use, the foam inside will need to be replaced, and that's because it will, I assume, disintegrate and won't be able to absorb moisture as well over time. And Prometheus will sell you replacement foam. There are 6 screws here. You can take out the metal plate and just replace the foam and see what that's all about. Now, in terms of other things that the humidor comes with, it has these 4 removable dividers. Pretty standard fare. The only thing here is that there are 4 of them. Most humidors typically have 1 or 2 of them. The last thing is more about what's not included with this humidor, and that is a lock and key. What's interesting is that a lot of the God of Fire or Fuente branded versions of this humidor seem to show a lock and key mechanism, but the Platinum Series branded versions do not. Now, I never really used the lock and key, so I'm all about keeping the aesthetic clean and don't really care, but just a little interesting tidbit. Next up is the half-wheel humidor testing process, and if you'd like to learn more about that, I'd recommend checking out the recent review I did of an Elie Bleu humidor, where I detailed this testing process in much greater detail than what I'm going to do now, which is basically to not detail it. The testing process starts out with a 2-week seasoning process, and that's done using 3 60-gram, 84% Boveda packs. The way I determine the 3 60-gram packs is using a Boveda metric of for every 200 cubic inches, 1 60-gram pack makes sense. So in this case, 599 cubic inches, rounded up to 600, and that gives you 3 packs. So the seasoning was definitely needed. The Bovedas lost more than 38% of their weight during the 2-week process. Also, the average moisture meter reading nearly doubled from 4% to 7.5% after the 2-week process was done. And the chart from the sensor push also suggests that the seasoning was quite helpful. It took more than a week for it to cross the 70% threshold. For those of you that are wondering, Prometheus's detailed notes make it clear that you should not use any like damp cloths or apply any moisture to the interior wood. It says that could actually damage the humidor itself. Instead, what it recommends is that you just take the included humidifier, put it in the humidor, and wait for it to get above 70%. And after that, you are good to go. The next part of the half-wheel test process includes a 13-week test with 69% Boveda packs. So I took out the 84% packs and replaced them with 3 brand new 69% packs. And the Prometheus performed pretty well. It did not perform as well as the aforementioned Elie Bleu. I'm not sure any wooden humidor is going to ever really perform that well. And what you're looking at on your screen is a graph of 30 days worth of testing data at the end of this test. And each one of those dots represents an hour-long or an hour measurement. So there's 720 dots here. You can see that it's pretty well in terms of the distribution. There's not a very wide range, but what you can notice is that it's getting close to it. Actually drips below 65% relative humidity towards the end. Now these Bovedas lost over 58% of their weight between when they started the 13-week process and when they finished it. I would say that's a good result, but not an excellent result. They were not rock hard or even really hard, but they certainly had lost a lot of the moisture and were getting to the point where they were, you could tell, or I could tell that they were close to being done. Now, the next part of this test is the included humidifier test, and this is what really impressed me about the Prometheus because it's a foam-based humidifier. It took about a day for it to recover from the lower humidities that were there at the end of the Boveda test, and then after that, it did very, very well. And my 2 main issues with fluorescent humidification is that they tend to over-humidify your cigars, and then once they just pump out all this humidity, then they're dry, and then you end up with this really, sort of just weird scenario of too much humidity and then no humidity, too much humidity, no humidity. The Prometheus really did excellent to avoid this problem. It didn't get above 72% relative humidity. It didn't drop below 65% relative humidity. It did very well in this 8-week test. And the way this test works is that after 4 weeks, I open up the humidor and I check to see if it makes sense to refill the humidifier to add more distilled water to it. And one of the things I really liked is because Prometheus told me just weigh the humidifier. If it's less than a half a pound, it needs to get refilled. And if it's more than a half a pound, you're good. All I did was I weighed it. It was more than a half a pound. And I just put it back in the humidor and closed the lid. And it did what it did. And in fact, at the end of the 8-week test, it was still more than a half a pound. And in fact, I don't stop taking measurements at a certain point, but even after 10 weeks, it was still more than a half a pound. Now, the final part of the half-wheel humidor testing process is to put the humidors into a dry cabinet, which is a cabinet that's made primarily for photography gear that's stored in humid climates, and the idea is to try to reduce the relative humidity to stop or slow down corrosion of those electronics. I use it because it allows me to set a relative humidity, and I can put a humidor in there and see how well the seal works. Unfortunately, this humidor is too large. It did not fit. It didn't fit in an angle. I tried my best, but I wasn't going to buy a brand new dry cabinet just to test this humidor. So unfortunately for this review, there is no dry cabinet test. So on to the pros and the cons. Starting off the pros list is something pretty bizarre, and it's the instructions. I found the instructions, both the ones that came with the humidor and the ones on Prometheus's website, to be really helpful and also really impressive. I use them for things like setting up the hygrometer, letting me know when I should think about refilling the humidifier, but there were other instructions, like the ones about seasoning in particular, where it just sort of preempted a lot of the questions or mistakes that people might make. It's really impressive. Prometheus did their homework and I think has probably updated its instruction manuals quite regularly based off the questions it gets from consumers, and just A+ job when it comes to the instructions. I cannot think of another humidor that came with this detailed and as helpful instructions. And oh, by the way, if you ever throw those things away, all you need to do is go on Prometheus's website, and the instructions are there, a lot of times with pictures, which are very helpful. Number 2 is the aesthetics. I really like the way it looks. People that have watched these humidor reviews before or read them on Half-Wheel, you know that I like modern design aesthetics. This certainly qualifies for that. If you'd like a more classic-looking humidor from Prometheus, you probably are going to want to go to the Milano or the Octagon series. The Macassar wood version for the Platinum series is certainly less modern-looking, but it still is a pretty modern-looking humidor, which is great for me. I really, really like like the way that this humidor looks. The third thing is also bizarre if you've read or watched these humidor reviews before. It's the foam humidifier. I cannot believe 2 weeks after telling you that you should throw away Elie Bleu's Florist foam humidifiers that I'm telling you that I would continue and probably will continue to use Prometheus's foam humidifier. I still think Bovedas are a better option as probably some other things are, but this actually worked, and that's more than I can say about just about any Florist foam humidifier I've ever used. So kudos to Prometheus for finding a way to make foam work. I still wish you'd use something else, but if you're going to buy this humidor and you want to continue to use the included humidifiers, I don't think you're going to damage your cigars, which is a pretty massive step in the right direction. So on to the cons list. I only have 2, and I would say they're relatively minor. The first is this interior piece that, like I mentioned earlier, came off during shipping, or presumably during shipping. I'm not entirely sure what this does, but the other thing here is that Prometheus could avoid this problem by just making this piece magnetic, like the other 2 things that are in the lid. You could put 2 small magnets in here, and that would mean that you would never have to worry about a consumer complaining that it came off during shipping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The second thing I'll say is that this humidor is a fingerprint magnet, not just the sort of exterior, the wood of the humidor, also all of these metal pieces here. In fact, I've had a microfiber cloth here the entire time to have to clean the humidor off, and I'm sure there's plenty of shots with fingerprints here. What I don't really understand is that some high-gloss humidors have this problem and other ones do not. I don't know if it's related to some sort of finish or whatever, but this one is certainly one of the worst when it comes to attracting fingerprints. I guess it's sort of the price you pay for how pretty it looks. So luxury humidors are completely unnecessary. They are not going to make your cigars taste any better, and they aren't going to change your life, or at least they haven't changed my life. That being said, if you want a pretty-looking humidor to store your cigars in, I do think the Prometheus Platinum Series is a very, very good option. And I think it becomes more compelling when you start to try to compare it to, like, what's the next direct competitor. So below this in price, you've got Savoy at like $600 or $700. Daniel Marshall makes plenty of humidors around $1,000. Neither one of those companies is going to sell you, at least to my knowledge, a bright red Sycamore humidor. They don't have very modern looking offerings, and yeah, I don't really think there's going to be a lot of comparing there. If you're looking for a humidor that looks like this, they don't really have much option. I think you're going to have to turn to Elie Bleu and to some degree Davidoff, and it makes a lot of sense. Those humidors are made in France, just like the Prometheus Platinum Series. However, those humidors are going to be probably a lot more expensive. I recently reviewed a 110 count Elie Bleu humidor that I would say is slightly smaller than this, definitely smaller in terms of interior volume, and that humidor was $3,200. That's a more than 50% price premium over this Prometheus Platinum Series. I do think the Elie Bleu, in terms of the sort of nth degree level of execution, is a better humidor. I don't think that very many people are going to be comfortable spending more than $1,000 to pay for that sort of level of execution. Because guess what? Very few people are going to look at this humidor and start to find things to complain about because there just aren't that many to do so. And I have a feeling most people are just going to look at it and go, I like the way that one looks, or I like the way that one looks, or better yet, you know what? $2,000 is good enough for a luxury humidor. And I certainly think in the case of this Prometheus Platinum Series, you are getting an upgraded experience over those $1,000 humidors. And I think it's a pretty compelling product. If you'd like to read reviews of more affordable humidors, you can check out halfwheel.com, where we review cigars, cigar accessories, as well as write about what's happening in the cigar industry on a daily basis.